Hi, welcome to Module 5, this second part, which is on safety and wellness in the workplace. You'll notice that Modules 4 and 5, in terms of the lectures, have been a little bit, I moved them around a little bit, so I hope that wasn't too terribly confusing. But in this particular segment, we're going to talk about workplace safety and wellness. Before I do, I just wanted to mention that I'm looking forward to reading your final papers. I hope that you found the interviews that you did useful and helpful. I usually get fairly high level of feedback on those as far as an actual assignment. So I hope it worked out as well for you as it has for others in the past. If you look at the safety movement in the United States, you'll notice that typically we started to see legislation at the federal level first. In the late 19th, early 20th century, and this was really a reaction to conditions that were brought on by the industrial age, where we began to see our society move from an agrarian, rural society to a more manufacturing one. And people moved into the city and into factories, and productivity and cost saving were very important, and we began to see people working longer and longer hours, younger folks working, children working, abominable conditions, and we started to see early deaths and illnesses in the workplace. So you'll notice by the dates that we started seeing some protection of workers at around the turn of the century. Along with that, we saw a major role played by organized labor. And safety in the workplace was one of the primary forces in the beginning and growth of organized labor in the United States. And part of that was that a lone voice, one employee who complained about work conditions, could just be fired. But if you had several hundred people who band together, then they had a voice and they could have an impact on the output of a company or manufacturing plant or mine or any other type of organization. I have included some statistics in this part of the lecture on safety because I think that it's something that we still don't take maybe as seriously as we should. But if you notice what I have on the screen, the cost of accidents is approximately $150 billion per year. And when you think of how hard we work to increase revenue and increase profit, that if we were just a bit safer and healthier on the job, perhaps we could have even greater benefits in terms of savings in the workplace. And when we're talking about these dollar statistics, obviously they don't include the human toll, which is by and far much greater. So work injuries are also important, and we notice here that 35 million hours are lost annually as a result of accidents. And if you just take a moment and multiply that times what you think might be an average hourly wage, you can see that the dollar amount is fairly staggering. There are a number of reasons why we have injuries and even deaths on the workplace. I've listed here the leading causes of death with the most common listed at the top, and you'll see probably some on there that you hadn't expected to see, but in fact it is a way of kind of bringing attention to the fact that when we think of injuries and illness and major accidents on the work site, we typically think of really dangerous types of jobs like mining or construction, a skyscraper kind of high-level construction. So, and that's not always the case. In terms of injuries on the job, here are the leading causes in order. And you'll notice at the top is something called overexertion. And one of the things we're going to talk about in this segment today is the concept of workplace balance, stress, and just healthy environments, and how all of that can help create a reduction in work injuries, which is of course better for people, but also better for organizations. a problem that is a more recent problem for us in our society is substance abuse. And you'll notice that 77% of drug users are employed, and more than, and that alcoholism alone causes 500 million lost days annually. And again, if you begin to multiply that times a day, an average day's wage, you can see that in dollars and cents, it's pretty staggering. Once again, it still has a human toll as well, not just on the actual individual worker who suffers from this problem, but also those around him or her. Clinical depression is something that we don't normally think of when we think of health and wellness in the workplace, but it is there's a major correlation between clinical depression in workers and accidents. And we know that our medical statistics show us that 1 in 20 people suffer from some sort of clinical depression, and that results in a large number of lost days annually. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, the federal government began to institute some safety and workplace legislation around health and wellness. And the Occupational Safety and Hazard Association was developed. It is administration, and it is under the Department of Labor, which is federal, but typically is implemented at the state level. And it has to do with things surrounding workplace safety and health, and also not just post-accident or post-injury and reporting, but also about developing programs that will help prevent illnesses and accidents. So as an employer and a manager, by the way, you should be aware that you are required to post the OSHA poster 2203. And if you do have an OSHA inspector or auditor who were to walk into your workplace and they did not see this, that you would very likely receive a fine for that. So it is a requirement under the law, and it's a way of allowing employees to see that they do have workers' compensation benefits. So I mentioned that the states have become pretty involved in the implementation, and that this can cover both the public and private sector, and or it can just be one or the other. But typically the states are the body that oversees them. It varies from state to state, and you'll notice here that the laws typically cover these areas, although to different extents. And one of the benefits that we see is more consistency in how the process is undertaken, and more consistency and fairness in the outcomes in terms of benefits, coverage, and care for individual workers, but also protection for the companies against frivolous lawsuits. So, along with the on-the-job accidents and injuries, we often forget about this thing called health and wellness, and it's become a really important issue in the workplace. One of the contemporary issue that is getting a lot of attention is the concept of work-life balance. And this is the idea that we somehow need to figure out how to balance all the things in our lives. Today, many of us find it takes 2 paychecks to run a household. And while we have 2 members of our household working, we're also raising families, finishing education, some taking care of aging parents. So many family issues as well as just work issues. And finding time to accomplish everything we need to accomplish in those areas and then take time for ourselves can be very, very difficult. I've loaded a hot link here for a work-life balance talk. It's by Nigel Marsh. He's very good, but he's also a little entertaining, which makes it even more enjoyable. It's a TED Talk. If you aren't familiar with TED Talks, that's something you might want to look at. I use them actually fairly often in my classes. But it's about a 10-minute video, and I encourage all of you to take a look at it. employee health is something that's important, and some of our larger companies will have both employee assistance and wellness programs. Employee assistance programs are really an anonymous kind of hotline that you can call as an employee if you're in trouble and you need help, particularly something like counseling. And it's separate from your employer, and the employer is unaware of whatever transpires as an outcome of you reaching out to the assistance programs. Employee wellness programs are programs that are put in place and funded by the employer, and they can be educational or they can be clinical. People can enroll in weight reduction programs or smoking cessation, a whole variety of them. And again, I think we had a discussion board question on this and privacy and those issues, which is something to be taken seriously. I noticed that as I worked through my career that over time, the problem of musculoskeletal disease and injuries became more and more pronounced in the workplace, and in particular back injuries, back and neck injuries. We noticed it's very difficult to determine how the cause of some of these injuries, because it can be a combination over time of actions by an employee, both on the job and off. So it's something that we do know that overall health and fitness levels and reduction of stress can help improve that. And so speaking of stress, this is something that you wouldn't normally think of for on the job concerns, but it is. It's a huge contributor to employees' well-being and also their ability to produce, to perform at work, and to be at work. There are two kinds of stress that we usually refer to. One is functional and the other is dysfunctional. Functional stress is something, let's see if we can come up with an example. Let's say you're an athlete and it's the day of the competition. And so you have a heightened sense maybe of energy, adrenaline, and anxiety. And that is something that would be a more positive stress. And it usually is fleeting, comes and goes. Sometimes a sense of urgency where we rise to an occasion and then it's over. Dysfunctional stress usually occurs over time, and it can have a very debilitating and negative effect on an individual, partially because it occurs day in and day out over time. And this can result in decreased motivation and performance on the job. Dysfunctional stress leads to a lot of absenteeism, and a total of $300 billion a year in lost productivity, absenteeism, medical costs, etc. And people often notice physical symptoms as an outcropping of dysfunctional stress. And these are real symptoms. I know that in the last clinic that I managed, we had people who would come in that were experiencing extreme stress on the job and have symptoms like their hair falling out, just really bizarre things. Others would have increased serious medical problems, cardiovascular problems. So one never knows, but it is not a positive thing. And there are some things we can do to help our employees and ourselves in reducing the stress that we see at work. Sometimes just creating a little more flexibility in our work schedules is important. That helps people deal with all of the demands on their time from the various areas of their lives. Also, I think that for me, I noticed that organizations I've worked in that have a high level of trust and are considered respectful of employees, have a more positive culture in which employees are valued, typically have lower stress in the workplace, less tension, and as a whole are a little bit healthier place to work. So I would encourage you to look at some of the motivational theories and the things that you learned in your organizational behavior class, in particular in management class, about how to create those kinds of cultures and environments. We also know that workplace violence is on the rise in our country, and that about 1 million people are victims every year to this sort of problem, and that it's amazing to me that we see more and more of this. Interestingly, the majority of the incidents are fistfights, which is kind of maybe not surprising. There are some things that we can do to try to keep a lid on this and to help prevent it. So one of the things is to not allow a lot of unresolved conflict to fester in the workplace, to keep an eye out, listen to your instincts and listen to your gut feelings about what's happening around you. If people are expressing threats, then you should take them seriously and listen to them. Sometimes that's very difficult to do because it seems surreal. We expect that our environments in which we work are safe, much like we expect our schools to be safe. But we know from recent events in the news that that is not always the case. So it's important to be diligent, and as managers we have an extra responsibility for that. We should also, as managers, make sure that we make it clear through not only words but also actions that we have a zero tolerance policy for this, and that any display of escalating violence that we deal with promptly and swiftly, and any displays of anger need to be treated quickly and resolved. And I think, again, having this more positive and trusting culture in which employees feel that they can come and talk and express concerns to HR or to managers is very, very important. Another thing that we as HR professionals and managers can do is to screen people that we're hiring. Look for any indicators of any kind of substance abuse or violence or negative behavior from previous employment. The other thing that this does is also begin to shield us if there is a problem that occurs later on, that we really did do our due diligence and did our best to protect our workforce against somebody that we would hire that would have these tendencies. Another thing that is becoming important in the workplace, particularly since a rise in terrorism, is this concept of having some sort of emergency plan should there be a natural disaster, for instance severe weather, or any kind of terrorist threat, so that we can respond to the needs of employees. It could mean that we need to house employees for 24 or 48 hours. It could be also that we need to provide greater assistance for them in times of need, or counseling after an event has occurred that's been a traumatic event. But to have a plan in place, hopefully one that we'll never have to use, is really important, because when something like this happens, it's pretty much too late to try to figure out what to do. So I thank you very much for your time and for all your hard work in the class. It's been a really enjoyable class for me. I know that it's gone by quickly. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really looking forward to reading your final papers when they arrive. And I look forward to seeing some of you in class in the future. Have a wonderful summer for those of you who are taking it off, and if not, maybe I'll see you in class. Thank you.